My husband, Arthur, always said my honey-almond cake was like a hug you could eat. For 50 years, that cake wasn't just flour and sugar. It was our love story, baked into every perfect slice. It was his favorite. When Arthur passed, that recipe, written in his shaky handwriting on an old index card, became my most precious memory. It was our secret, a taste of a lifetime, shared only with family. My daughter, Kara, knew how much that recipe meant. She inherited my passion for baking, or so I thought. But Kara had a different kind of hunger, a hunger for fame, for money, and she saw my cake as her ticket to the top. She begged me for the recipe for years, promising to keep it secret. I hesitated. This wasn't just ingredients, it was Arthur's last whisper to me. But she was my daughter. How could I say no to my own flesh and blood? I finally gave it to her. I trusted her with our secret. She swore on her children's names she would protect it. She lied. Barely 6 months later, I saw it. A huge billboard right in the center of town. A picture of my cake, my unique honey-almond cake with Kara's smiling face next to it, advertising Kara's Gourmet Cakes, our signature honey-almond creation. My world shattered like a dropped mixing bowl. She had stolen Arthur's legacy. She had stolen my identity. The billboard screamed her betrayal, but the pain was a silent, crushing weight in my chest. This wasn't just business. This was a personal theft, a desecration of my late husband's memory. Hello, I'm Rose, and this is the story of how I, a simple baker, used a tiny secret ingredient and a desperate gamble to reclaim my life, my husband's memory, and the recipe that was truly mine. Before we dive into the bitter ingredients of betrayal, tell me quickly in the comments where you are watching from, and if you believe true love can conquer even the deepest greed, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. I pulled out Arthur's old index card, the one with the recipe. I traced his familiar shaky handwriting. He had written the recipe over 50 years ago, every detail perfect. I focused on that one tiny, almost invisible detail that only Arthur and I knew. A secret pinch of dried lavender, ground so fine it was almost dust. It was the soul of the cake. Kara's copy, the one on the billboard, was missing this soul. I knew I couldn't fight her with just my voice. I had to prove that my cake was unique, infused with something only Arthur and I knew. My revenge wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be in a public comparison of the two cakes. I just had to figure out how to force that moment. Kara's arrogance, claiming my life's work was worthless, became the core of my revenge. She thought the only proof was my word against hers, but she underestimated a baker's need for perfect inventory and records. I couldn't afford to lose this fight. I went straight to my pantry, which I treated like a financial ledger. I pulled out my old ingredient logs, simple notebooks detailing every pound of flour, every bag of sugar, and every exotic spice I had purchased over the last 20 years. This paper trail was my defense. Kara had stolen the spice formula, but she didn't steal the paper trail that proved when I created it. My legacy book wasn't just a collection of recipes. It contained specific, dated entries for the creation of the sweet cinnamon spice formula. I had recorded the specific brand and cost of every exotic ingredient I used 5 years before Kara was even out of high school. This proved legally that Kara couldn't possibly have modernized or invented the spice. This was my shield against any claims she made. But the question remained, how do I get this evidence in front of the public? I needed a stage big enough to show the whole world the difference between a loving creation and a cheap copy, without giving Kara time to fix her recipe. I knew I needed a very specific, high-profile event to force the final comparison. I had the proof in the pantry, the invoices and logs, and I had the secret ingredient, the lavender. I knew Kara's cake was a fraud, but I needed a stage where the judgment would be immediate, fair, and public. I started looking through every local paper and food magazine. My mind was racing. It couldn't be a simple store review. It had to be an event where blind judgment was the rule. I wanted the critics to taste my cake and her cake without knowing whose was whose. This was the only way to prove my unique flavor was the original. I found several options, and I dismissed them one by one. The county fair? Too small. Kara could ignore it. A local magazine shoot? Too easy for Kara to bribe the editor. I needed something with high integrity, sharp judges, and wide media coverage. I realized the stage had to be a competition, one that valued originality above all else. This was my only way to force the comparison. I continued to scan the pages of the food magazine, looking for the right opportunity. Retention hook. The stage is about to be set. I knew the clock was ticking because Kara was expanding her business every week. If I didn't act soon, her lie would become too big to dismantle. I was preparing to bake the cake of my life. But first, I needed to find the ultimate stage where the truth would finally speak louder than any billboard. I found it. The annual regional bake-off. It was a massive event, televised locally, judged by 3 famous food critics known for their sharp palates and even sharper words. Most importantly, Kara was entering her Honey-Almond cake as the grand prize contender. This was my stage, this where I would expose her. I decided to enter my own cake. I would submit my Honey-Almond cake with Arthur's secret ingredient under a different name, a simple, unassuming title like Grandma Rose's Special Cake. The rules were clear. Each baker submitted their best work and the judges tasted them blind, looking for originality and unique flavor profiles. This was crucial. My secret ingredient needed to speak for itself. The tension in my kitchen was thicker than heavy cream. The bake-off was only 2 weeks away. I wasn't just baking for a prize. I was baking for Arthur's memory, for my stolen identity, for my own honor. Each time I measured flour, each time I cracked an egg, I thought of Kara's smug face on that billboard. It fueled me. My son, David, Kara's brother, came to visit. He saw me baking late into the night. "Mom," he asked gently, "why are you putting yourself through this? It's just a cake." I just smiled, a sad, determined smile, and said, "Some things, David, are worth fighting for. Some stories need to be told, even if they're only told through a taste." The night before the bake-off, I worked in a quiet, almost sacred ritual. The smell of honey and almonds filled my small kitchen, a comfort and a promise. I carefully mixed the batter, adding that tiny, almost magical pinch of lavender dust. I poured it into the pan, smoothed the top, and slid it into the oven. This wasn't just a cake going into the oven. It was my truth, my memory, my vengeance, and it had to be perfect. The bake-off was tomorrow. The day of the bake-off arrived, bright and chaotic. The convention center was buzzing with people, lights, and cameras. Kara was there, surrounded by her staff, looking confident and glamorous. She saw me, an old woman in a simple dress, holding my cake box. She offered a patronizing smile. "Mom," she said, "good luck, though I doubt the judges are looking for retro flavors." Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. I carefully presented my cake, Grandma Rose's special cake, to the entry table. It looked humble next to Kara's elaborate, professionally decorated entry, Kara's signature Honey-Almond creation. The judges were three famous food critics known for their sharp palates and even sharper words. This was a blind taste test, meaning they had no idea whose cake was whose. This was crucial. My secret ingredient needed to speak for itself. The judging began. The cameras focused on the critics as they tasted cake after cake. The tension in the room was immense. Then they reached the honey-almond category. They tasted Kara's cake first. They nodded, made notes, complimented the texture. Kara beamed, confident in her stolen glory. Then they tasted my cake. I watched their faces. The first bite, a small nod. The second bite, a slight pause. One judge, a stern-faced woman with an almost legendary palate, slowly raised her eyebrows. She took another, slower bite. Her eyes, usually so critical, softened slightly. A whisper, almost silent, passed between them. There's something different about this one. My heart pounded. The lavender was doing its work. The judges continued their tasting, but their attention had clearly shifted to my Grandma Rose's special cake. They took more bites, chewing slowly, thoughtfully. The stern-faced judge, known for her brutal honesty, picked up our pen. She wrote something on her pad, then circled it. My stomach fluttered. Kara, watching from across the room, started to look nervous. Her confident smile wavered. She probably recognized the look on the judges' faces, the same look she had seen countless times when her cake was being praised. But this time, it wasn't for her. Finally, the judges pushed the plates away. They conferred in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Kara's cake, then at mine. The head judge, a kind-looking older gentleman, cleared his throat and addressed the audience and cameras. We have made our decision for the honey-almond category. The room held its breath. He began, Both cakes are excellent. However, one cake possesses a truly unique, almost ethereal quality, a subtle note that elevates it beyond the ordinary. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. It speaks of tradition, of love, and a very personal touch. This cake, ladies and gentlemen, is truly original. My hands gripped my apron. The unspoken recognition was happening. The head judge announced the winner for the honey-almond cake category. The winner is Grandma Rose's special cake. A wave of applause, but also confusion, swept through the room. Kara's jaw dropped. She looked utterly stunned, then furious. The cameras immediately turned to me. I walked forward, accepting the award, a simple plaque with a quiet, dignified smile. The judges then went into detail about why they chose my cake. The stern-faced critic spoke. There was a subtle, almost indescribable floral note in the Grandma Rosa's special cake. It wasn't overpowering, but it hinted at something truly unique, an original, personal touch that showed true artistry. The other cake, while delicious, felt familiar, like a perfect copy, but without that soul. Kara's face turned beet red. She stared at me with her eyes burning with pure hatred. She finally understood. She realized that the judges, in their blindness, had tasted the secret ingredient, the lavender, and through it, they had tasted the difference between a stolen recipe and a genuine creation. My old wise tales had spoken a truth no lie could cover. My quiet victory in the blind taste test was a public, undeniable judgment of her fraud. The news spread like wildfire. Local grandma beats daughter's gourmet empire at Bake Off. Mystery ingredient uncovers family feud.
The local news picked up on the judge's comments about the unique floral note in my cake. Food bloggers started speculating. Kara's customers, intrigued by the story, began to question the originality of her signature honey-almond creation. Her sales plummeted. People felt cheated knowing her fame was built on a lie. The public, who had once celebrated her, now turned against her. My own children, David included, finally pieced together the entire story of her deception, realizing she had tried to gaslight me about my own memories. Kara, desperate to save her business, tried to dismiss it as a quirky coincidence, but the damage was done. My quiet, secret revenge had become a very public scandal. I didn't say a single word to the media. I didn't need to. The cake, Arthur's legacy, had spoken for itself. I had protected his honor, and I had reclaimed my own. 1 year later, Kara's gourmet cake empire had crumbled. Her bakeries closed, her trucks were gone, and the billboard with her smiling, lying face was replaced by an advertisement for car tires. Her greed had devoured her. My life, though, was full of a different kind of sweetness. My small kitchen was bustling again. People were seeking out Grandma Rosa's special cake, not for a prize, but for the story, for the taste of authenticity. I started a small online business, baking my cake directly to people. I didn't want a huge empire. I wanted to bake with love, just like Arthur and I always did. My son David came to my house often. He helped me with deliveries, and we baked sometimes together. He never once mentioned Kara, but his presence was an apology, a silent understanding. The family was slowly healing, piece by piece, like a perfect cake being lovingly rebuilt. I often sat in my kitchen, looking out at the lavender patch Arthur planted. I would bake my honey-almond cake, adding that tiny secret pinch of lavender dust, a whisper of his love. The smell filled my home, familiar and comforting. I decided that the story was not over until I made one final public statement. I called the local news station, the one that had covered the bake-off, and invited them to my kitchen. I showed them Arthur's original index card. I showed them the lavender patch outside my window. I explained simply, my recipe was stolen, and I won it back not with lawyers, but with love. I baked one final cake on camera. As I added the lavender dust, I looked straight into the lens, my eyes clear and strong. I said, "This isn't just baking. This is truth, and the truth always wins." I then took a simple plaque I won at the bake-off and placed it prominently beside the recipe card. I had secured my legacy for generations, showing that nothing is more valuable than integrity. Never too old to teach a necessary lesson or to bake a perfect batch of cookies.